So, um, I will apologize to anyone watching this online. Something's gone wrong with my computer and this software. They don't like each other anymore. So, all you can see is my face. You can't see the slides. So, I apologize for that. Those of you obviously here tonight can see what's going on, but they can't. So, all right. So, just to remind us, this is kind of our theme verses for what we're doing, where Jesus, speaking of the tribulation period, tells the disciples and those who will be alive during that time, says, "Now learn the parable from the fig tree when its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door." And of course, we take the principle from that we can see the stage being set for that tribulation period. We can see it taking place before our very eyes. Um, and so we're not in that period, but we know from scriptural teaching that the church is going to be removed before that time begins. So we're getting closer with each passing moment. And so we need to be wise. We need to be living in expectancy and be living prepared for the Lord to call us home at any moment. So here's what I plan to do tonight. As I said earlier, I left probably about 4 different articles on my bed at home, so we won't be able to get to those tonight. But we're going to start out looking at what's occupying the news pretty much around the world right now, Israel against the world. Hopefully we'll look at some of the apostasy taking place and then difficult times, and you'll see why I call it that when we get there. But we're looking at Israel against the world. You see the nations there that are going to be coming against Israel at some point in the future. Obviously, those two passages aren't what it's Ezekiel 38 and 39 that present these different nations, but I always like to remind us of Genesis chapter 12 and what the promise is there, and then also the prophetic passage of Zechariah chapter 12. I believe it's supposed to be 2 and 3, not 22 and 3. So anyway, wouldn't be one of my PowerPoints without some sort of mistake there. So Genesis, you recall that promise God made to Abraham: "Go forth from your country, from your relatives, from your father's house, to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And then in Zechariah, God makes this pronouncement that, "Behold, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples. And when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will be against Judah. It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured." And it's been suggested that that's speaking of a severe hernia injury that might take place when someone tries to lift a heavy object. He says, "And all the nations of the earth will be gathered against Israel." All right. So I want to start out in this section with a look at Iran rising, because we know that Iran is behind much of what's going on with Hamas, even though Hezbollah is the one directly associated with Iran. Iran is also a supporter of Hamas and apparently helped plan the attacks. So the first thing we see, very brief, it's just a paragraph here. The Sudan and Iran resumed diplomatic relations severed 7 years ago, promising to open embassies soon. And that's pretty much the entirety of the article. But why is that? Why is that important? Well, does somebody have their Bible with them that might want to read something, or I can do it? Well, I guess my phone doesn't want to work tonight either. Wow. Donald, do you want to read Ezekiel 38, verse 5? Verse 5.
Persia, Ethiopia, and Put, with them, all of them, with shields and helmets.
Okay, so this is listing the nations that are going to come and join Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. And the interesting thing is that Ethiopia, also known as Cush, which, let me go back here, we can look at it. Right down here at the bottom, you see where my cursor is. Cush here, that is Ethiopia, and that's where the Sudan is. So that's why this is an interesting issue, is that now they're repairing relationships that had been broken around 7 years ago, and they're going to be opening embassies in each other's countries again. So that's resuming a relationship that was there, and could be, and I would suggest that likely is just another piece of the puzzle coming together in preparation for an attack on Israel at some point in the future. Now, it could be that that attack is so far in the future that Sudan and Iran break off relationships again. But regardless, it's going to be repaired in time for the attack to take place. All right? So the next thing we have is in this idea of Iran rising. Can y'all read that? Oh, good. That comes up much better than it does on my screen. So, citing escalating Iran threats, the Pentagon sends the second carrier, Patriot missiles and THAAD, to the Middle East. So Lloyd Austin has come out and said because Iran is escalating, at least, they're escalating not just in their threats, but they're actually escalating their proxy forces, which we saw obviously with the attack a few weeks ago of Israel. So he says that he has given the order to send the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower to join the USS Ford in the eastern Mediterranean. And this author says it's significant as the U.S. Navy has already trained for dual carrier operations, the kind of interoperability which would enable a massive air attack campaign from the sea. So it looks like the United States is preparing to go to war with Iran, possibly. And of course, that could be the trigger that sends Iran and Russia and the other nations into Israel. So they're sending, along with this, our missile defense systems, such as the Patriot missile and the THAAD system, THAAD. I'm not sure what that stands for. It wasn't mentioned in the article. But apparently it's a type of missile defense system. And so the writer says these will clearly offer a protective envelope for U.S. forces in the region and parts of Israel potentially vulnerable to long-range ballistic missiles from Iran. The specific location of the Patriot and THAAD missiles were not mentioned. Of course they weren't. Likely for security reasons. I don't know why they say that. Of course they're not going to tell you where they are. My goodness. The writer says an interesting analysis on Iran Watch sites what it terms deployed and possibly deployed cruise missiles of various ranges. The longest range cruise missile cited, and these are cruise missiles that are Iranian, cited the analysis is the now deployed Pave LACM capable of traveling up to 1,600 kilometers, yet Iran Watch also specifies two newer, possibly deployed cruise missiles with unknown ranges called the Meshkat Sumar, or the KH-55, and the Hoveze. Parts of western Iran, given this weapons range, would be capable of targeting Israel, and of course Iranian proxies can likely fire them from much closer ranges as well. This places Israel and U.S. forces at risk in the region to a very high degree, although the kind of guidance and target tracking technologies built into Iran's cruise missiles may not be fully known. So Iran is definitely preparing for war with Israel. Recently, one of our, I guess it was the Ford, since it's already over there, USS Ford, intercepted missiles being shot at Israel. And then our base was in, I guess it was our base in Iraq, was attacked, and some of our Marines were injured.
with
Drones,
a
yeah,
little
yeah. So yeah, we're
The THAAD is Thermal High Altitude Area Defense.
thermal high altitude aerial defense. So it's would that sounds more like a laser system than a missile system. I don't know.
They do have a laser system there.
Yeah.
It has the ability to intercept at the terminal point of where it was being fired. It's got radar, it's got high sophisticated reconnaissance surveying, so
Okay.
it's supposed to be one of the latest and greatest.
Hopefully it works. Our third story says you'll never believe where Hamas hid a military headquarters. Actually, you will. So, y'all do know the hospital didn't blow up, right? You know the hospital was not bombed.
A failed missile.
Huh? Yeah, it was a failed missile from the Islamic Jihad. And the Orthodox Church that they said that Israel blew up is still there. It's perfectly fine. Anyway, those are separate stories. But so the writer starts out the Israel-Hamas war took a totally the Israel-Hamas war took a totally expected turn over the weekend as Israeli Air Force jets, helicopters, and drones pounded terrorist outposts hidden in the darndest places. On Sunday, the IAF warplanes struck a headquarters compound hidden beneath a mosque in the West Bank city of Jenin. Israeli officials have said those killed belonged to Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and were involved in planning an imminent terror attack from the compound. Hiding military or terrorist assets, this is the author's commentary, which we would agree with, I'm sure. Hiding military or terrorist assets under a mosque is the act of a coward. Maybe not as cowardly as sending terrorists, which the BBC Moral Freak Show helpfully described as mere gunmen, to murder partygoers and toddlers, but it's along the same general lines. Historian and strategist Edward Luthwak warned Friday that in Gaza there are no visible military facilities, while Hamas fighters can shed their fashionable black outfits and dress like civilians. Nevertheless, Israel does know where to find Hamas soldiers hidden in their fixed, immovable targets. So they have these deep tunnels. They have a network of tunnels under the city. And so the writer, or Luthwak, goes on and writes, these are the deep tunnels, too deep for aerial bombing. Hamas has been lining them, and listen to this now, Hamas has been lining them in concrete for more than 10 years using construction equipment and vast quantities of cement donated by different governments and international organizations meant to build apartments for refugees. Hamas diverted many of those resources to protect, house, and arm their own terrorists. Inside those tunnels are the assembly lines for Hamas's rockets, command posts, weapons, and ammunition depots, and even deeper tunnels that house its leaders' lodgings and headquarters. I also, I haven't been able to have the time to go look this up myself, but they're complaining about the hospitals they don't have enough fuel to run the generators to get the electricity, And from the reports that I've heard, I haven't gotten a chance to go look up the things for myself yet. But what happened is that they were allowing fuel trucks into Gaza meant for those purposes, and Hamas took the fuel. Not all of it, but a large portion of it. So, yeah. I'll just move on. Now we move to this interesting section, America against Israel. Now, I said Sunday that the majority of America was on Israel's side, and I hate to have to make this caveat because it should be understood, but if there be people out there who would use it against me if I don't say this, so I will. I don't agree, and I could not possibly agree because we're humans and we have disagreements, but I could not possibly agree with everything the Israeli government does. Okay? And that's not what I'm saying when I say I support Israel. So, if there's anybody out there watching or anybody in our congregation that believes that's what I'm saying, don't be so foolish as to believe something like that. I'm standing up for the people, for God's chosen people, not for the Israeli government per se, although that's part of it. But they're God's chosen people, and the promise that if you bless Israel, God will bless you, and if you curse Israel, God will curse you. That promise has not gone out of effect, regardless of what some people want to say. So this first story in this section is from Just the News. Matter of fact, both stories in this section are from Just the News. This is John Solomon's website, I believe is his name. Anti-Israel sentiment has permeated Biden administration from the start. And this is just kind of a sickening article. But it begins like this. Even as President Joe Biden touts his support for Israel, many of his appointees have expressed anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiments even after Hamas terrorists invaded Israel and killed more than 1,400 people, including at least 31 U.S. citizens. The Zionist Organization of America National President Morton Klein told Just the News, Biden has appointed the most anti-Semitic, anti-Israel people to important posts we have ever seen. ZOA has identified dozens of current and former Biden administration officials with a history of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic comments. For instance, Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He opposed sanctioning Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and designating it as a foreign terrorist organization. So the leading, and this is common knowledge, the leading exporter of terrorism and supporter of terrorism around the world is Iran. And he opposed sanctioning Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and designating it as a foreign terrorist organization. It was Antony Blinken. I am 99.999% sure it was Antony Blinken that John McCain, before he died, said Antony Blinken was dangerously incompetent and should never be put in a position like he's in now. And that's coming from a guy that I have no respect for. After the October 7th attack against Israel, Blinken made a post calling for Israel to reach a ceasefire with Hamas. And he has since deleted that post. So it's like someone robbing a bank and then telling the police to cease fire and not put the person in jail. That's a terrible analogy, but you see what I'm saying. It's just ridiculous. You start a war, you take 200 of my people as hostages, and then say, oh, you need to cease fire. And look, we let 4 of these people go. We're the good guys. Really? You came in and beheaded children, and they've been doing the same thing for years.
They attack, and then they say, we're
Yeah,
done.
exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
Peace.
Yeah. Yeah. Klein, the leader of the Zionist organization, what's his name of it again? The Zionist Organization of America, National President Morton Klein. Klein says the following: almost every person appointed to an important post in Biden's administration is hostile to Israel. National Security Council Senior Intelligence Director Meir Bitar, when he was a student, I'm not sure if that's a he or a she, Maher Bitar, who knows, As a student, Bitar led this As a student at Georgetown University in 2006, Bitar led the Students for Justice in Palestine and hosted a student meeting about how to demonize Israel in the minds of Christians. The Georgetown Students for Justice in Palestine chapter put out a statement blaming the brutal October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel, as have many other chapters across the nation. Bitar received his master's degree from Oxford and wrote a thesis about the Nakba, 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 the Arabic word for catastrophe, referring to the founding of Israel in 1948. So he wrote a paper. His master's thesis was on the fact or the idea that the formation of Israel as a nation in 1948 was a catastrophe. Another Biden appointee, Rima Dodan, serves as White House Legislative Affairs Deputy Director. She justified Palestinian suicide bombings against Jews as the last resort of a desperate people during the Second Intifada in 2002 when she spoke in Lodi, California about the conflict as a student at Berkeley. Let's see. A 2021 letter signed by more than 500 Biden campaign alumni demanded the president to hold Israel accountable for its actions after Israel responded to a barrage of rockets from Gaza. At least 9 of the letter's signatories are now Biden administration staffers, according to analysis from Real Clear Politics. The Biden administration also sent $730 million to the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency, which works exclusively with Palestinians, according to New York Post. The Biden administration's funding isn't limited to people in Palestine. By easing sanctions on Iran to allow Islamic Republic to export oil to China, which nobody's been talking about, it gave Tehran more than $50 billion, according to the think tank. So we're over here complaining about the $6 billion that they unfroze, and they've frozen it again, so maybe they did. But that's nothing compared to the $50 billion that we've allowed them to get their hands on. Additionally, Biden partnered with the Council on Islamic Relations for his administration's strategy to counter anti-Semitism. Did you catch that? The Council on American Islamic Relations, he partnered with them for their strategy to counter anti-Semitism earlier this year. Klein says it was ludicrous that CARE is included in the anti-Semitism strategy. He says that's like having David Duke put together a program against racism against blacks. Everybody remember David Duke, a Ku Klux Klan leader, right? So we are helping Iran to rise in power and influence, and our nation is turning against Israel. So all those terrorists that have entered our country, which we know they have, keep your head on a swivel. Our next story. A majority of young Americans believe Hamas terror attacks can be justified. So a recent poll was taken by Harvard Capps Harris survey. And the article starts out like this. While Americans overwhelmingly condemn the Hamas terrorists, young Americans are bucking the trend, and a majority believe the brutal attack may be justified by the so-called grievance of Palestinians. While 76% of Americans believe the recent terror attack was not justified, in this recent poll, 24% believe the attack can be justified by the grievance of the Palestinians. Now, when you break it down by age, the majority of almost every age bracket said the attack could not be justified except for respondents aged 18 to 24. The 18 to 24 age respondents, out of that, 51% felt Palestinian grievances could be justified or could justify the Hamas attacks, while 49% said they could not. Among those 25 to 34-year-olds, 48% said it could be justified to 52% saying it could not. So that even that's not a good number. The 18 to 24 block stood apart from other brackets on other questions as well. It backed Israel over Hamas 52-48, with the closest group, those aged 25 to 34, doing so 71% to 29%. So even though they believe that the attacks can be justified, they still back Israel over Hamas 52 to 48%. But like I said, those are sad numbers. The 25 to 34 age group backs Israel 71% to 29%. The youngest bracket was also most inclined to term Hamas fighters as militants rather than terrorists, with 41% opting for militants and 59% for terrorists. So anyway, we see that. Oh, well, let me read this next section. Young Americans also took the most charitable attitudes toward the Hamas raid, with 47% expressing the belief that the group focused its efforts on the military of Israel and 53% saying the group indiscriminately targeted civilians. So in other words, 47% believed that the idea that Hamas attacked civilians was a lie. Curiously, 68% of young people believe it's true that Hamas terrorists killed 1,200 Israeli civilians by shooting them, raping them, and beheading people, including whole families, kids, and babies, but 32% said that that account is false. Fake news. All right. Young people, here we go. Young people in the elite institutions, such as Harvard, ranked among the most vocal, and Harvard University students group's open letter attracted national security for its claim to hold Israeli regime entirely responsible for the unfolding violence. 33 other Harvard student groups signed on to the open letter, which the Harvard Undergraduate Palestine Solidarity Committee published. So, about 34 groups of students at Harvard believe everything was Israel's fault. All right.
Well, of course it is, because they won't just give them the money.
I know. And you know, they just want peace. A piece of this and a piece of that.
And all of the
From,
other.
well, and then you have all these college students chanting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I wonder how many of them realize that that's the whole state of Israel is going to be wiped off the map by that.
Well, Penn State is losing millions of dollars.
Harvard, a lot of Harvard people are backing out too.
They're pulling their money.
All right, let's look at apostasy. It's always fun. And of course, this is where my stories end because I left the rest of them at home. But J.D. Greear platforms lesbian pro-abortion activist district attorney to lecture the church on morality. Any of you know who J.D. Greear is? Just a few years ago, J.D. Greear was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. He's a young guy. He's the guy over here on the far right. He pastors a very large church, I believe, in North Carolina. He used to be, years ago, I kind of listened to him every now and again, thought he was okay, but he's gone totally woke. He's supporting the homosexual movement and everything. J.D. Greear, the highly influential pastor of Summit Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, recently hosted Durham County District Attorney, what a name, Satana, it's Satan with an A at the end, Satana DeBerry, for what was termed a family discussion on racial issues and faith. So she's well, let's be clear, Greer's decision to give a platform to DeBerry, an openly lesbian and pro-abortion activist, is nothing short of a blasphemous betrayal of biblical Christianity and dereliction of his pastoral duties. Let me just read a little bit of this and we'll be done. I don't know how to pronounce her name because it's Satana. It's Satan with an A at the end. That's her name. Or at least that's what it is here in this article. I'll put it that way. Maybe they spelled it wrong. Satana DeBerry isn't just a public official, she is a fervent advocate for policies that fly directly in the face of the clear teachings of Scripture. Her tenure as district attorney has been a vivid display of ideological activism masquerading as justice, but that fits perfectly with the social justice movement, okay, which he supports, J.D. Greear supports. In fact, she goes into detail in the video. She was uh, she goes into detail in the video she was platformed by Summit Church in. That's a terrible sentence. As well regarding her prosecutorial activism. DeBerry has reshaped criminal prosecution to reflect her own viewpoints deeply at odds with biblical teaching. In short, she hates prosecuting black people and admits that she lets them off the hook often. She has limited the use of cash bail and scaled back the prosecution of school-based offenses in a manner that many would describe as a lenient approach to crime. Moreover, DeBerry has been an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ rights. She's a lesbian herself. She believes that sexuality and identity are about more than who you love. For me, queer is about culture and about a worldview. Yeah, that's true. Under her leadership, her office uses a broader definition of domestic violence that includes same-sex dating couples. Her office also recognizes people by their chosen gender identity, a practice seldom found in the criminal justice system. In DeBerry's words, if that is part of the crime, we will talk about it. Most egregiously, DeBerry doesn't merely support abortion rights as a personal belief. She has sworn an oath to bring that activism into her role as a district attorney. In a society where the sanctity of life is a cornerstone of moral law, her office has vowed not to prosecute any abortion cases that could come as a result of changes in the state's laws restricting abortion. This is an outrageous act of failing to uphold the law, dereliction of duty that disregards the biblical doctrine of the sanctity of life. And I'll read this last part here. Greear has taken virtue signaling to dizzying new heights. You've heard of toxic masculinity. Is there such a thing as toxic Christianity? His mind and ministry are consumed by social justice activism. He's repeatedly tarnished the pulpit and his platform as a Christian leader by compromising truth in favor of social activism. He's also admitted to using, I can't remember the name of the group, but you can pay them to form your. He's used a group that will put together sermons for pastors. Okay. Anyway. All right. So that's the last story I actually have the paperwork for. This was going to be an interesting story. Caught up in the rapture. And we're going to have to go back. We're going to do this story next week if I remember to do it because it's just garbage. Because obviously you and I are the problem because we believe in the rapture of the church. We're going to look at difficult times based upon the Second Timothy passage 3:1. But we won't look at that tonight. And I was going to read this story about this young woman, Kat Van D. Is anybody familiar with Kat Von D? Is anybody familiar with her? She was a very famous tattoo artist. I've never seen the show, but she was on a couple of different reality shows, LA Inc. and something else. But she's got tattoos all over, and she was a tattoo artist. She was into witchcraft and all those dark things. Well, she has become a Christian. And from what I've read, and she publicly had her baptism put on her, I guess, Twitter or whatever, Instagram. But she seems like the real deal. And so in this article, and I think I'll just hold this over till next week too, she is one, from listening or reading what she says, she is one of the most mature baby Christians, famous baby Christians that I've ever seen. You've seen how so many times a famous person will come to Christ, and next thing you know, they're on a speaking engagement. She's refusing to do that because she even says this in the story. She says, I'm brand new. She said, I'm not equipped yet to go out in front of people. But she says, as I grow, I'll become better equipped, and maybe I'll do that some. Part of her story, though, is that she said the rudest, most vicious comments about her becoming a Christian and letting people know are coming from people who claim to be Christians. And so I'm going to hold this over and get a little deeper into it next week, because that is a major problem in the so-called family of God, is that we don't, well, like the old saying goes, we shoot our wounded. Instead of helping them back up and helping them get well, we simply kick them out. And anyway, I have a story that goes along with this, along the same lines. I wanted to use them both together. But anyway, all right. Well, that's it for tonight. Any questions?
I just saw two very interesting things at the very end of the day. Al Jazeera's head of journalism over in Gaza, his whole family was apparently sheltering in the same place and they were killed, and they told him while he was on air reporting, his wife and son and daughter and grandson were all killed. And of course, I read the Al Jazeera article, and they intimated that Israel had deliberately targeted the safe house where they were. But then other news things after that, I mean, it just happened a few hours ago, saying, again, who knows if Israel really did do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be a publicity. And the other thing was interesting was about those tunnels that I read a thing just late this afternoon that Israel has, and I'm sure we do know about, but foam bombs, that it's something that's two chemicals, and when, in a container, when they take the division thing out, the plate between them, they mix and they can throw them and it explodes, and it's like a giant foam of some kind plug in those tunnels that they're planning to use when they go down there. And that, of course, they have sophisticated equipment like we do where they can see where there are people in those. They can to some. But anyway, that was kind of interesting. Just to imagine, a big styrofoam plug in the tunnel.
Yep. All right. Nothing else? Bobby, why don't you pray us out of here?
Lord, thank you for this time together. We ask that you watch over Israel like we know you are, but we ask that you strengthen them and protect them as they go through these days. And we ask that you watch over and keep us as we do as well. Thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah.